well, when I say coding, what I mean to say is markup, not actual coding. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my image. And that's what it looks like. Now that is huge. Now, there are times when I might use the self-closing tag here. I might not. Now, again, that doesn't work because image is a self-closing component or element, whatever you want to call it. Now, sometimes I'll put that there, sometimes I don't. I am quite inconsistent with my coding conventions. I should really be more consistent with it. So let's be consistent to make these HTML tutorials actual tutorials instead of looking like an idiot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width of this image to be a lot smaller, because as you can see it's pretty big. So let's set it to 64 by 64. That's good. It's alright, I guess. The next thing I'm going to do is pass in a style. Now, this is kind of like saying, okay, we want to add some CSS now. In fact, it's exactly what that is. We are going to apply a style, and I am going to say margin is going to be 5, 5, 5, 0, 0, I believe. I've forgotten which way it is. No, that's top. What's this? No, that's right. That's bottom. This is confusing. It always confuses me. I really don't know why. Right, so we've got some padding. Well, not really padding, but margin. It kind of looks like padding, but it's margin. Now, there is a difference between margin and padding, but that will become more obvious a bit later when we start adding text and graphics and other such things, okay? So I'm not going to explain it right now. Excuse me. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to assign this an ID. I'm going to call it logo. Now, there are two different types of assignments that we can make to any element that is displayed on screen. We can assign an ID, which can only be used by one element at a time. Okay, so each ID is unique. It is a unique identifier. Now, I could have used class, which means I could apply this logo name to any other element, but I don't want that. So I'm going to make this ID. Now, I'm going to represent an example of that much later on when we get to that point. So in my CSS, what I'm going to do is do a hash logo, and that is going to select this. As you can see over here, brackets is automatically selecting the element that we are highlighting in code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply that margin that we just did just now. Oops. Because, in fact, I think we can just do that. Yeah. Okay. So we can do that. And the next thing I want to do is say fixed. Oops. No, I don't. I want to say position is equal to fixed. I want to fix this element in position so that it doesn't move when we scroll. And the last thing I want to do is, what was I going to do? Oh yeah, z-index 900. Now what z-index is going to do, it's going to act like an illusory layer, right? So we're imagining that this logo is going to be at the top of everything that is displayed below it. Okay, if that makes sense. So we've got our image, we've got our logo. Now, what I'm going to do is get lorem ipsum. Oops. Now this is good for generating some very quick paragraphs, so that we can let's generate 20 of them. Might sound like a lot. So what I'll do, so I'll have this P, which stands for paragraph, and then we'll just paste all of that in. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I want to show you what it means to have a fixed position image. So when I scroll down, this stays in the same position. Obviously everything else is being rendered like this and in a horrible black font, and it isn't even justified, which is giving me OCD. But this is just an example of how you can fix elements in position. There are other types of positions. I'm not very good with positioning elements. I've got to point that out there. I may be good at HTML. I may know the basics and enough to know and to start having this tutorial. But positioning elements in HTML and CSS is not that easy. I mean, a lot of people seem to think that designing websites is easy. It's not. It really isn't. Getting things to position properly and getting things to render properly in exactly the way that you want it is not easy. For some reason, the web specification developers decided to opt for using positional elements with different position types, and if you want to fix things in certain positions, you have to use margin and padding, and it's overly complicated. I realize that the reason for it is because a lot of people, or rather the original web specification designers, wanted to go for something that would allow the elements to just flow in a specific direction. But that, I mean, you can just type something like flow left and down, right, instead of having all this position and stuff. And it's just like, what was the web specification designed for? Who was it designed for exactly? Because there's a lot of programming languages that were originally, okay, specify X, Y, width and height, right? A lot of programming languages did that back in the day. Why are we now moving suddenly into a weird methodology of positioning elements in this way? I don't understand. I don't think many programmers do, but that is the way it is. And now we're learning multiple different languages just to get stuff done. I know I'm complaining a lot, but I come from a computer programming background. I'm not originally a web designer, so I do complain about web design for that reason. I don't understand why it has to be this complicated, but it is. But you do what you got to do, right? So, moving on a step, before I rant too much, I'm going to get rid of this P. Now I've got this logo here, and I kind of want to use that to navigate to the home page. Now we don't exactly have much here to navigate to, so all I'm going to do is create this anchor tag. It's called an anchor tag, and I'm just going to put in a hash here, which is basically going to tell the browser I want to not navigate anywhere, if that makes sense, because I don't have anything to navigate to right now. Now the hashtag, what that would normally do is if you put a value next to it, it will navigate to an identifier. So if you remember, this ID has a logo next to it. If we were to put in logo and we click on it, it would navigate to the position of this image. Now that wouldn't, now we're doing it, but because the logo is specifically there, we're already at the logo, so it's not scrolling anywhere. But I'm going to get rid of that. That can be useful for instantly scrolling somewhere, but that's not very user friendly. We will obviously be using animations in this new website, so that will be something that we will use at some point in the future. But for now, we're just going to stick to the basics. Okay. So I've showed you images, I've showed you anchors, and I've showed you paragraphs. The next thing I'm going to show you is div elements. Now divs on their own don't do anything. They are not actual elements. Now I am going to create a class and I'm going to call it col2. What does that mean? It means I want columns times 2 in a way. So what I'm going to do, say dot col2. Now the dot in here indicates class, and obviously the hash indicates ID. Now you need to remember that, because if you mix things up and you're wondering, well, why is this not working? And then you look back at your HTML code and you think, oh wait, I've assigned this an ID instead of a class, and it's not working. So just be careful of that. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to specify width 50%, and I'm going to float left. Okay. So I'm going to make 2 of these, and let's put some paragraphs in here. In fact, no, I'll make 4 of these. So let's put some paragraphs in there. I'm going to reduce the amount I put in. So let's do some varying things in here. So let's copy, paste. So we've got some text here. Let's do the same in here. So let's only copy 1 paragraph this time. So let's take a look at that. So that looks like that. Let's now go into, oh, I missed the top one out. That was a bit silly of me. Let's copy 3 paragraphs and put that in there. As you can see, that doesn't quite look right, does it? So what's going on there? This isn't, I've put in 2 columns. I've put in 1 column here, which is half. I've put another column here, which is again half. I've put another column here, which is again half. But unless we obviously highlight it, we don't know where it is ultimately. So how do we fix this? How do we put this div class, which I expect to be underneath this lot, right? How do I do that? Well, let's go back to our main.css, and there is a way in which we can do that. So I'm going to create another class, style. I'm going to call it clearfix. Now this is essential, pretty much, for making sure that your floating elements, because these are what's called floating elements. Now what this is going to do, I mean, this is pretty much self-explanatory. I want a width of 50% of the screen, or the parent element, right? What this is doing is we are saying I want to make sure that the element is floated to the left. In other words, for every element that I align to the left, I want it to flow right in a way. If there's no more room on the screen, then float left still, but go down. If there's space here, put it here. If there's no space here, then put it down here, right? If that makes sense. So if this text, because this text is now the third column, what would effectively be the third column, but it clearly isn't, then what's going to happen is when we do this and then we save, why is that not updating? There we go. Don't know what it's doing. It's supposed to be live previewing. But anyway, as I was saying, so because we've now got this text here, the next element, which is this bit here, is now being rendered here. But now we've got this weird gap in between this and this. And it's like, what's going on? Well, we can fix that with clearfix. So I'm going to type in div class clearfix here, and this is going to fix it in a way. Now I'm going to do DisplayBlock. I'm going to set the height to 0 and the content to that. Now you're probably wondering, what's that all about? In fact, we don't need that there. We need that here. So let me explain what's happening. So we've got this clearfix class, which we are assigning. Oops, what am I doing? I want to go to here. So we are assigning this to here, right? Now what this is going to do is on its own, it's going to clear both. What does that mean? What that's going to do is it's going to clear everything to the left and everything to the right so that everything flows down, if that makes sense. So imagine you've got an element here, an element here, and an element here. If div class clearfix is set to this element here, it's going to clear this element on its left and move it up above this one, and it's going to clear the one to its right, so it's going to move this down, right? Because of the way that HTML elements flow. That, of course, is given that the position is set to static, which is the default for all elements on the screen. But I'm not going to go into positioning elements yet because that's beyond this tutorial for now. But that's what clear is doing. We are moving elements, we are clearing both sides of whatever the element we put in between. So because we have created this div class element here to say clear right, which is this element to its right, and left, which is this one here, we are bringing this element to its left up, And then we are saying we want to push this element down, and that's now why we've got essentially 4 columns now instead of well, I say 4 columns, it's really 2 columns on 2 different rows, which is exactly what we want. So what is this bit doing? Well, this, I need to clear both here as well. So what this is going to do, now we're not actually seeing it take effect here. Oh, that's because I haven't actually assigned it to any of these yet. Might be a good idea. Clear fix. So if I did that there, I don't think that'll make a blind bit of difference there, but it might make a difference here. So if we did clear fix, again, it's clearing and it's clearing everything to the left and everything to the right. That makes more sense. Here though. So why is it not highlighting? There we go. So if you wanted to bring elements down in a manner that makes sense, that is what you would use. You would use this clear fix element to make sure that the content flows in the direction that you need it to flow in order for it to display properly, right? I don't need that there right now. So that's perhaps an important thing to know, just in case for whatever reason when you start designing your own websites, you're thinking to yourself, why is this not working? That's the reason why. Now I'm also setting a few other things. I'm saying display block. I'm setting the height to 0, which basically means I don't want it to be displayed at all. And we're setting the content to a space, meaning that what's going to happen is the clear fix element, we are adding a space which has a height of 0, so it's essentially invisible, and we are setting it to display block. What does display block do? Well, let's go back to this image. In fact, I'll create a new one. So again, if we have 3 elements and 2 either side, so 1 in the middle and 2 either side, if we were to set this middle one to a block, what that's going to do is it's going to cause cause this element to become an element on its own in a row. Now that's not the same as making these elements go up or down. That's what clearfix does. If we're setting display block to this element, this is going to stretch, right, across. And what HTML does to these 2 elements, it will determine based on other parameters, but not anything set to this, just based on ultimately what happens after this has been set, right, to display block. Now, display block has a certain interesting thing. When you display block, normally that's kind of like a toggle. So if you want to display something, i.e. you want to make something visible, this can become visible by setting its display to block. Now let me show you an example in code. More obvious example. So let's go back to this. So if I were to set call to to display block. And then get rid of this width. What that has now done is it has, as you can see, set each column to be its own, to be on its own row. Now, because we have also floated left, it doesn't really make much sense. But if we say, if we remove that, and then we say 50%, suddenly we no longer have that float. The display remains as block, and it's still each one is still its own row, right? If we try to do some things next to it, it will force this element to go down because this is display block, right? If that makes sense. Oops, what am I done? I wanted span. Of course, I'm thinking of something else. Hang on. Span, blah blah blah. Right. So obviously you can have spans, and what you've got. What did I just do? I accidentally scrolled up a minute. So what you've got, you can have blocks, which is p elements. You can set a div element to be inline block or block. Now what inline block is going to do is it's doing this basically without these arrows. So imagine these arrows don't exist. So this is what inline block does. You have different varying sizes and inlines between each element, which is what this span is doing. So we've got this span, and that is adding to this, right? And you're seeing it being highlighted in brackets as well. So that this is a span, even though it's still part of the same paragraph. And we can we can set the color to this to be red, for example, right? And that will work just fine. So now it's red, right? So those are basically different displays in which you can change the way in which the elements flow. So if it's a display block, it's going to cause the element to be on its own row, regardless of what the width is. If we go back to float left, it's doing all this, right? We've got our random paragraph in the middle of nowhere. So we've got this random paragraph in the middle of nowhere, right? And that's just before the clear effect. So that's actually adding just below this block, this div element here, because there's space there. Obviously that doesn't affect it because div elements are kind of themselves blocks, I think. I believe div elements are blocks. We can set it to be inline block if we wanted to. Again, that's not really making much of a difference because we're floating left, but oh, of course. What was I thinking? Inline block, even though, as I explained, it inlines the elements, what that's ultimately actually, whoopsie, I was not meant to do that. Let's fix that a minute. Okay, so if we have inline, and we got rid of this again, so now, as you can see, even though we're setting the width, we can't do that anymore because we've just set the column to be inline. What that's saying is I want every single element assigned to col2 to be inlined, in which case it's going to align all of this text next to each other regardless of where it is, as long as it has that same information. So where is this? What is it not going to show me? I guess not. It's showing me that, it's highlighting me that, but it's not highlighting anything else. It must be a bug with brackets. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. So we've got different types of displays. If we were to set this to inline block, we can specify a width, because with all blocks we can display a width. And what that's going to do is it's going to say, okay, I want to specify the width of this block to be 30%. This block I want to set to be 50%. But I want them both to be inlined. So I want them both to be inline blocks. Now what that's essentially going to do is in theory, obviously it's not working in this case, but in theory what would happen is if you have two inline blocks next to each other, this is going to go here, right? And then that will appear next to it because they're both inline blocks. Because the width, both these widths are less than 100%, so they can be next to each other if it's inline block. If that makes sense. I don't think it's happening in this instance because we've set 50% and it's just flowing down anyway. But let's specify 40%, for example. Oops, what have I done? Let's specify 40%, for example. So yeah, as you can see, now that we've set it to 40%, the inline block is actually taking effect. So we've got this first element here, which is this one, and then we've got our second element, which is here. This is how inline block works. So it goes into the next column. Then we've got this paragraph. Then we've got our clear fix. Then we're then we're going into here and here, right? So sort of back to square one, but I don't want that. So let's go back to what we originally had, which was a width of 50% and a float that is left. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that makes some sense. Okay. I am going to stop here for now because it's coming up to an hour and I've been talking for quite a while, and after I've talked for so long I tend to sort of ramble and my speaking tends to be less clear normally. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to take a bit of a break before I start the next tutorial, but I'm hoping that you are enjoying yourselves. You're probably not. You're probably getting bored after 50 minutes of talking, but we will of course be continuing with this tutorial. We're going to be adding some CSS styling, especially to the fonts, but we don't want to be using Times New Roman everywhere. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Goodbye.